Hello everybody and welcome back to another Daryl Dixon Season 1 review, and today we'll be talking about Episode 2, and this is a very good episode. I have to say straight off the bat, this episode follows not one but two plot lines. The episode opens with Isabelle in 2010 and us seeing the fall of France and what type of life she was living. And she was basically a con artist. She would go around, steal watches and stuff like that. And we would find out things about her partner and her sister. And the only downside about this plot is I wanted more of it. I'm being serious. I was really into it. Even though near the end of it, it was all in French, I do not care. I just really wanted to see the fall of France. I really like start of the apocalypse stories. So it was very good to have maybe 10-15 minutes of this episode dedicated to that. I wanted maybe it be 50-50 between that plot and the now plot. And then the now plot is about Daryl, Isabella, Laurent, and the other nun, them traveling to Paris, and them getting sidetracked, basically losing their mule and finding these orphans now in this old nursery, and he ends up on a side quest where he's trying to get a horse back and trying to get some medicine to save this dying woman. And with this plot, it takes up the majority of the episode, and it does work well. It is basically a filler episode. It's just a random stop in the storyline, so they're like, okay, we can have Daryl and his group head to Paris straight away, but it's done well. It progresses the characters. You have more growth between Daryl and Isabella. We dive deeper into Laurent and Isabella, and I really like it. It's a bit weird that they're going through the Daryl's kind of surrounded by children a lot in this show, and they're treating like Daryl's not a father figure and all that, when the last 3 seasons of The Walking Dead were about Daryl stepping up to become the father figure to RJ and Judith because their parents keep abandoning them, and then he kind of ruins that character progression in that show by abandoning them a year later. So it feels like they're slightly retreading some ground with the children and Daryl relationship because Daryl's done all this in The Walking Dead, but it's still very entertaining. And this episode has lots of little things which I absolutely love, like the little joke with Daryl being Father Daryl in this episode, and because he's Father Daryl, he has to sit at the head of the table and has to take prayer before they eat. I really like that. And then while he's eating, everyone copies the way he eats. It's just little things like that in this episode, throughout this whole episode, with Daryl especially, which really do make this show great. The little things I really do love. There's some weird nitpicks I also do have to say about the little things, like when Daryl meets this other American. The odds might be really weird, but I do not care. It's quite a cool scene. Daryl's fighting this guy in this old castle, and he meets another American. The American mentions he's from Texas, and he assumes that the apocalypse is only in France. He's trying to get off the place after 14 or however so years. And Daryl mentions that there's been some clear time jump, because Daryl mentions that he's been up the East Coast, he's been to the Midwest, and he's been down to Texas to this man from Texas, and he doesn't seem to mention that Texas is currently a nuclear wasteland because, you know, Texas was nuked. So it's just an offhand comment that I feel like from a man from Texas that he's talking to, Daryl should have mentioned, oh yeah, Texas is completely obliterated. Your family has no chance of surviving. And if you went to Texas, maybe there's a chance he bumped into Alicia or bumped into Troy if Troy was going across the south of America. So there's a little reference to Texas, and there's no nuke reference, but there is a chance that you could have had a Daryl and Alicia meet up. But the more important thing of this episode is the cinematography and pacing and everything like that was done amazingly. I absolutely love the way the show looks and it sounds amazing. And this is another extended episode, so hopefully every episode of Daryl Dixon will be a little longer, because we didn't get that in Dead City. They eventually ended up becoming normal length episodes. But Daryl Dixon episode 1 and 2 are both about an hour, so it's very, very good. And it doesn't feel like you're sitting there for an hour watching Daryl Dixon. It is paced well, and it's split between 2 timelines and 2 plot lines. Works well. I feel like it's a bit too much on the future, however they do have to do a lot in the present day, and I felt like in the past timeline you could have done a bit more to flesh out Isabella's character a bit more. Maybe we'll get more flashbacks in later episodes. I know we do get a Daryl Dixon in America flashback to explain how he ended up on the boat, because we did see that in the trailer. So it looks like we will get a bit like in Dead City, where each episode kind of had a bit of flashbacks with, I think it was from 2 to 4. In those 4 to 3 episodes, you had a flashback moment for every character, or Maggie and Negan basically. So I feel like they're going to do the same with Isabella and Daryl in this show. The action in this episode is great. Last episode is more people on people action. This is more Daryl on walkers. And we don't see any burners in this episode. However, we do see a walker that does lunge at Daryl quite fast. So was that a smart or variant walker? It was killed off very quickly, but Daryl's walking, and then a walker really quickly goes at Daryl, grabs him, and almost bites him. So there might have been a variant walker. I definitely think that was one of the smarter walkers. We know that episode 3 is probably going to have some runners because they're going to be in Paris, and in the trailer we do see a walker smash his head against the window quite fast. So maybe this was the first of many more runner walkers that we will see in Daryl Dixon. I do also want to quickly mention Laurent. He has no annoying parts in this episode, and he's quite interesting. You have Laurent meeting other kids for the first time, and you see how clearly different he is because of his upbringing, and they continue the specialness of Laurent. Not to the extent where he's able to quote Judith without meeting her like in the first episode, but I really do like Laurent because they had a chance to make this world beyond levels of bad by giving Laurent too much screen time with these other kids. No, he has just enough screen time to develop his character, and you have him question this world and realizing everything he believed is almost a lie. And there's an ongoing theme in this episode of lying to spare someone from the pain, and you have Daryl do it, Isabella does it, and you have this other character which Daryl and Isabella meet. They all do it, and they all kind of face it. You have Laurent confront Isabella about it. The only character who kind of doesn't face this backlash is Daryl, because he ends up owning up to the lie, where the other two characters let it blow up in their face slightly. There's a little theme in this episode which I quite enjoyed. It was quite subtle, quite nice. Now I do want to talk about the ending, so big spoilers. And the ending of this episode has 2 scenes. One, it has the scene where we have the bad guy find out who Daryl Dixon is, and he's going to follow him up north to Paris. And then the more important thing, in the flashback, we know exactly why Laurent is special. And big spoiler, so Laurent is the nephew to Isabella. And the reason Laurent is special is he was born from a walker, and the way she was bit was a bit dumb in the flashback. She gets out of the car when Isabella tells her sister to stay still. They get out, they kind of mess around, and it acts like she hasn't seen this affected before, and I'm like, okay, what's the timeline of the flashback? It was a bit unclear if it's been a couple days or only a couple of hours, because she acts like she's never seen the walkers before. It bites her on the arm, and then she goes into labour. And Laurent is born after she dies. And all I was thinking is, oh, they copied The Last of Us. And the origin for both Laurent and Ellie and why they're special are exactly the same. They're both born to an infected parent. The only difference is that Laurent's mum was already dead by the time Laurent was born, and Ellie was born during the bite. So that's the only difference, but I just didn't like how similar it is to The Last of Us. They should have done something different. I know Greg Nicotero did mention that before the show came out, oh, there was a lot of similarities, but it will eventually turn different. And I'm sitting in the show being like, okay, we're 2 episodes in, it's almost identical at some points. Like, the miracle child is that the same. You have Daryl warming up to the child by the end of the episode. And I'm sitting there looking at the nuns like, you're going to be the Tesses. You're going to both die at some point. Especially the second nun, because we had more flesh out of her. We've had Isabella fleshed out. So I think we're going to lose that second nun at some point. And maybe Isabella will be split up at some point. But it definitely looks like they're going down The Last of Us. And it's just a miracle how they were able to copy The Last of Us this much without knowing of The Last of Us' existence. They have no excuse being like, oh, it wasn't out on TV. The Last of Us is a story that is over 10 years old. It came out in 2013 originally on the PS3, and it was a big hit. Greg Nicotero must have known, or someone in the writer's room must have known of The Last of Us. If they're writing this now, some of those people who were in their 20s or nearly 30, they were young children by the time The Last of Us came out. Or they were in their teens, so they must have played it. So how is it exactly this similar? We didn't get the exact origin in the game of how Ellie was immune. So you could say the exact origin of Laurent and Ellie's immunity, or specialness, because we don't know what exactly is special about Laurent. We know he has some sort of like Messiah powers. It's exactly the same. That's just a coincidence, but we should move on to my one sentence, that's one word overview, because I could be debating and ranting about the Daryl Dixon, The Last of Us being the exact same story for hours and hours. But one sentence, that's one word overview. And I have to say this is a near perfect episode, and I give it a 9 out of 10. I can't say any real faults about this episode other than I want more of the full timeline. I want more of the Isabelle at the start of the apocalypse, and I want to know more about what happened there. That's the only thing I would say that's bad about this episode. It's entertaining from start to finish. It sounds great, looks great, it's paced well, and it's a great time. So I do recommend you go and watch Daryl Dixon. But this is it for me today. So goodbye, peace out, and I'll see you in my next video.